The Beverly Hills morning shimmered with a polished glow, Rodeo Drive's palm-lined sidewalks buzzing with wealth and exclusivity. William "Will" Jackson eased his 2003 Toyota Corolla into a parking spot, its faded silver paint an oddity among the gleaming Ferraris and Range Rovers. At 42, Will carried a quiet strength, his navy blazer crisp, his dark eyes sharp with purpose. A black man who'd built Radiant Gems into a $180 million jewelry empire, he was its founder and CEO, a Forbes-lauded self-made mogul with 47 stores across 12 states. Yet he clung to his old car, a nod to lean years and hard-won triumphs. Touching the tarnished silver bracelet on his wrist, his grandfather's keepsake, he stepped toward his flagship store, ready for an unannounced visit to ensure its standards matched his vision. Inside Radiant Gems, Beverly Hills chandeliers bathed diamond displays in a soft, sparkling light, each piece a testament to Will's relentless drive. The store, his pride and joy, generated $2.3 million monthly drawing A-list celebrities and old money families. Will had designed every detail, the lighting to make Gems dance, the layout to welcome all. But today, he wasn't the CEO. He was just a customer testing whether his values of respect and dignity held firm. Straightening his blazer, he noted a slightly crooked display case, but said nothing. His unannounced visit meant to observe the store's true colors. Will headed toward the Stellar Collection, the store's crown jewel, a $2 million display of rare diamonds. Its centerpiece, a $350,000 necklace he'd crafted himself. As he approached store manager Margaret Ellison, a 38-year-old woman with a polished bob and a wardrobe screaming privilege, clocked him from across the room. Her smile, tight and insincere, didn't reach her eyes. Raised in Connecticut's old money circles, Margaret saw her role as curating exclusivity, deciding who belonged in Radiant Gems. Will's Corolla, his unflashy demeanor and his blackness, had already marked him as an outsider in her mind. "Good morning," Sir Margaret said, her voice dripping with forced cheer. "Are you looking for something specific?" The question carried a subtle edge, as if she doubted he could afford anything. Will, used to such undertones from years of navigating spaces not built for him, kept his tone warm. "I'd like to see the Stellar Collection, please." Margaret's smile faltered her eyes, flicking over his blazer, his lack of ostentation. The stellar pieces were for serious buyers, not browsers, she thought, her bias kicking in. "Those are our premium items," she said, her tone cooling. "They start at $200 Perhaps you'd like to see our fashion jewelry instead." The suggestion stung a redirect to pieces under $500, based on nothing but her assumptions. Will's jaw tightened, but he gave her the benefit of the doubt, his grandfather's bracelet grounding him. "I understand the price," he replied calmly. "I'd like to see the stellar necklace." Margaret hesitated, caught between protocol and prejudice. Refusing outright would be too blatant, so she pivoted. "May I ask the occasion?" she pressed, hoping to steer him away. Will's eyes narrowed slightly. "Does it matter?" he asked, his voice steady, but pointed. Reluctantly, Margaret unlocked the display, her movements slow, her body language screaming distrust. She hovered over the case as if guarding it from a thief. Will leaned in his trained eye, catching the necklace's flawless clarity. "This diamond's cut is exceptional," he said, almost to himself. "Colombian origin, right?" Margaret blinked, startled. How did he know that? Her composure slipped, but she recovered, her voice stiff. "Yes, it is. Our pieces are crafted by master jewelers." Will nodded, testing her further. "The prongs could be tighter, though. They're slightly uneven." The critique hit Margaret like a challenge. No one questioned her store's quality, especially not this man whose old car she'd glimpsed outside. "Our craftsmanship is impeccable," she snapped, her politeness fraying. The front door chimed, and in walked the Warrens, a wealthy white couple in their 60s, regular customers, whose presence lit Margaret's face with genuine warmth. "Excuse me," she said to Will, barely glancing at him, and hurried to the Warrens. "Mr. and Mrs. Warren, how delightful to see you," she gushed, offering them champagne and seats. Will stood alone by the open display, ignored her words to the Warrens carrying across the room. "Sorry for the delay. We get all sorts in here." The phrase, laced with disdain, landed like a slap. Will's pulse quickened. Years of microaggressions, traffic stops, suspicious stares, assumptions of criminality flashing through his mind. He straightened his calm a shield, but his anger simmered. Margaret's bias wasn't just poor service. It was a betrayal of the values he'd built Radiant Gems on. He touched his bracelet, grounding himself, and decided to give her one more chance to do right. But as she fawned over the Warrens, showing them pieces, without a hint of scrutiny, Will knew this was no mistake. It was prejudice plain and raw, and he wouldn't let it stand in his own store. The air in Radiant Gems Beverly Hills felt thick with tension, the soft hum of classical music barely masking the undercurrent of prejudice. William "Will" Jackson stood by the Stellar Collection's display, his fingers grazing the tarnished silver bracelet on his wrist, his grandfather's keepsake, a reminder of resilience forged through struggle. At 42, Will had built a $180 million jewelry empire from nothing, but here in his own flagship store, he was invisible, reduced to a stereotype by manager Margaret Ellison. Her dismissive words, "We get all sorts in here," still echoed a racial jab that stung with familiar pain. Will's calm held, but his anger simmered, fueled by years of navigating spaces where his blackness was a presumed threat. Margaret, 38, her polished demeanor a mask of old money privilege, fawned over the Warrens, a wealthy white couple browsing nearby. "This sapphire would be stunning for your gala," she cooed, offering them champagne and plush chairs, her warmth a stark contrast to the cold scrutiny she'd given Will. The Warrens in their 60s smiled comfortably, handling pieces worth hundreds of thousands without a hint of doubt from Margaret. Will watched his trained eye, noting she hadn't asked for their proof of funds or questioned their intent. The double standard burned a reminder of countless times he'd been tailed in stores or stopped by cops for looking suspicious. 15 minutes passed. Will left standing by the open Stellar display, the $350,000 necklace he'd designed glinting under the lights. His request to view it had been met with Margaret's condescension, her suggestion to try fashion jewelry, a clear signal she saw him as unworthy. He'd called out her critique, noting the necklace's uneven prongs, but she'd dismissed him, her bias blinding her to his expertise. Now ignored Will's patience, frayed his mind, flashing to his early days, scraping by, facing rejection, building Radiant Gems to ensure no one felt the exclusion he'd endured. Jessica Lee, a 23-year-old sales associate with a kind smile, noticed Will's solitude. Raised to treat everyone equally, she approached, her voice genuine. "Sir, can I assist you with the Stellar pieces?" Her sincerity was a flicker of hope, but Margaret's sharp glance cut across the room. Jessica reorganized the back inventory. She ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. Jessica hesitated, her eyes apologetic, but obeyed, leaving Will alone again. The rebuke stung not just for him, but for Jessica, whose decency was stifled by Margaret's control. Will's anger deepened, rooted in memories of profiling the cop who'd tailed him in college, the landlord who'd assumed he couldn't pay rent, the subtle slights in boardrooms despite his Forbes ranking. Margaret's behavior wasn't just poor service. It was a betrayal of Radiant Gems' mission to welcome all. He walked toward her where she laughed with the Warrens and interrupted politely. "Excuse me, I'm still interested in the Stellar necklace." Margaret turned, her face flashing annoyance, as if his presence was an intrusion. "Look," she said, her voice now openly hostile, "those pieces require a serious financial commitment. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in our budget section." The word budget dripped with disdain, her assumption clear: a black man in a modest blazer couldn't afford her store's best. Will's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone even. "I'd like to purchase the $350,000 necklace." Margaret laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that turned heads. "I'll need proof of funds first. Credit cards, bank statements, something to show you can afford it." Will's eyes flicked to the Warrens, who'd handled similar pieces without scrutiny. "Is that standard for all customers?" he asked, his voice low, but pointed. Margaret glanced at the Warrens, then lied smoothly. "For purchases this size, yes." The falsehood was blatant, her bias laid bare. Will's pulse quickened, but his grandfather's bracelet grounded him. "Interesting," he said, pulling out his phone with deliberate calm. "Let me make a call first." Margaret's eyes narrowed, mistaking his action for defiance. "If you're not serious, I'll have security escort you out," she snapped, gesturing toward Samuel Carter, the 45-year-old security guard watching cautiously. Will ignored her, dialing a number he knew by heart. "Robert, it's Will Jackson," he said, his voice crisp, authoritative. "We have an issue at the Beverly Hills location. I need you on the line." Robert was his COO, a trusted ally. Margaret's confusion flickered, but her arrogance held blind to the storm brewing. The store's atmosphere shifted, customers glancing over, sensing a confrontation. Jessica, peeking from the back, frowned, while the Warrens paused their browsing. Will's call wasn't just a response, it was a signal, a spark that would ignite Margaret's downfall. He'd given her every chance to treat him with dignity, but her prejudice had dug her own grave. Now he'd reveal the truth, not with rage, but with the quiet power of a man who'd built an empire to defy the very biases she embodied. The Beverly Hills store of radiant gems stood frozen, the air taut, as if the chandeliers themselves held their breath. William "Will" Jackson, 42, stood by the Stellar Collection's display, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice carrying the crisp authority of a man who'd built a $180 million empire. "Robert, I need you to pull the personnel files for the Beverly Hills location," he said, his eyes locked on Margaret Ellison, the store manager whose prejudice had turned his unannounced visit into a reckoning. Will's navy blazer and 2003 Toyota Corolla had marked him as an outsider in her eyes, his blackness a silent accusation she'd weaponized. Now her arrogance was crumbling, confusion flickering across her face as his words, Beverly Hills location, hinted at ownership. Margaret, 38, her polished Connecticut upbringing, no shield against the storm she'd ignited, stammered, "What are you doing?" Her earlier demand for Will to prove his funds to buy the $350,000 stellar necklace, her mocking laugh, her threat to call security, all exposed her bias, captured by security cameras, and the phones of customers like the Warrens, a wealthy white couple she'd fawned over. Will lowered his phone, his gaze steady, the tarnished silver bracelet on his wrist, his grandfather's keepsake grounding him. "I'm addressing a violation of my company's values," he said, his voice low but lethal. The store's soft classical music seemed to fade every eye on the unfolding drama. Jessica Lee, the 23-year-old sales associate who'd tried to help Will before Margaret shut her down, peeked from the back, her face pale. Daniel Brooks, the 26-year-old assistant manager, watched with growing unease, his business school instincts sensing a crisis. Samuel Carter, the 45-year-old security guard, stood poised, his military background keeping him calm amid Margaret's escalating panic. "Your company." Margaret scoffed, but her voice wavered, her certainty eroding as Will's authority sank in. Will's mind flashed to his past, growing up in a cramped Chicago apartment, His grandfather's stories of surviving Jim Crow, the rejections he faced, pitching radiant gems to skeptical investors. He built 47 stores across 12 states, designing spaces where no one would feel the exclusion he'd known. Margaret's actions, her condescension, her assumption he was a thief, her preferential treatment of the Warrens betrayed that vision. "My name is William Jackson," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Founder and CEO of Radiant Gems. This is my store." The words landed like a thunderclap. Margaret's face drained of color, her hands trembling as the name clicked. She'd seen William Jackson on company memos, newsletters, the Forbes list, but never connected it to the black man she'd dismissed. Her recent hire just 6 months ago and her focus on exclusivity had kept her ignorant of Radiant Gems culture. Jessica gasped, clutching her phone, where a company newsletter photo confirmed Will's identity. Daniel's jaw dropped, while Samuel's eyes widened, respect flickering. The Warrens' champagne glasses in hand froze, their privilege suddenly uncomfortable. "No, you can't be," Margaret sputtered, desperation creeping in. "I'd know if—" Her voice trailed off as Will raised a hand, silencing her. "You didn't know because you didn't care." He said, his tone measured but searing. "You saw my skin, my car, and decided I didn't belong." The accusation, backed by her recorded microaggressions, hit hard. Customers whispered, one live streaming the scene, the video already spreading online. Margaret's eyes darted to the cameras, her career unraveling in real time. "Please, Mr. Jackson," she pleaded, her voice cracking a climactic shift from arrogance to fear. "I didn't mean, I was just protecting the store's reputation." The excuse rang hollow, her earlier words. "We get all sorts in here," echoing in Will's mind. He saw her panic, her tears, but also the pattern, the Warrens' unchecked browsing, Jessica's rebuffed kindness, the assumption that a black man couldn't afford his own designs. Protecting whose reputation, Will asked, his voice steady. "Yours, or the prejudices you brought here?" Margaret sank into a chair, mascara streaking her composure shattered. "I have a family, a mortgage," she begged, reaching for sympathy. Will's heart twinged. He knew struggle, but her actions weren't a mistake. They were a choice rooted in bias he'd fought his whole life. "You had every chance to treat me fairly," he said, his grandfather's bracelet glinting under the lights. "You chose not to." The store remained hushed, customers and employees awaiting Will's next move. Jessica's eyes shone with admiration, Daniel's with relief, Samuel's with solidarity. The Warrens slipped toward the exit, embarrassed by their complicity. Will's call to Robert, his COO, was still active, the line open to address Margaret's fate. He'd given her rope to hang her own career, but the weight of his decision pressed on him. Justice was necessary, but so was the vision he'd built, Radiant Gems, to uphold a space where dignity, not discrimination, defined every interaction. The Beverly Hills flagship store of Radiant Gems stood in a hushed tableau, the weight of Will Jackson's revelation still settling like dust after a storm. At 42, the black CEO and founder of a $180 million jewelry empire commanded the room, his navy blazer and tarnished silver bracelet, his grandfather's keepsake symbols of a journey from Chicago's hardscrabble streets to Rodeo Drive's pinnacle. Margaret Ellison, the 38-year-old manager whose racial bias had sparked this reckoning, sat crumpled in a plush chair, her mascara-streaked face a portrait of ruin. Her accusations calling Will a thief, demanding proof of funds, fawning over white customers like the Warrens were now her undoing, captured on security footage and customer live streams. Will lowered his phone, his call to Robert. His COO concluded with instructions to process Margaret's termination. His dark eyes, steady with purpose, swept the store. Customers clutched their phones, some still recording while employees Jessica Lee, Daniel Brooks, and Samuel Carter awaited his judgment. The Warrens, the wealthy couple Margaret had prioritized, had slipped out their champagne glasses, abandoned their complicity exposed. Will's voice, calm but resonant, broke the silence. Radiant Gems was built on respect for every person who walks through these doors. Today, that value was betrayed. Margaret's sobs faltered as she looked up, desperation clinging to her. "Mr. Jackson, please, I didn't know who you were," she pleaded, her Connecticut polish gone. Will's gaze hardened, his memories of prejudice, traffic stops, boardroom slights, the assumption he was less than fueling his resolve. "You didn't need to know who I was," he said. "You needed to treat me like a human being. Instead, you chose bias over dignity." He paused, his grandfather's bracelet glinting. "Margaret, you're terminated effective immediately. Clear your desk." The words landed like a gavel. Margaret collapsed inward, her career shattered. "I have kids, a mortgage," she whispered. But Will's pity was tempered by her actions. She'd ignored his expertise, dismissed him as a threat, and rebuffed Jessica's kindness, all because of his blackness. "Your choices hurt more than this store," he said. "They hurt every customer who's ever felt unwelcome." Margaret gathered her things, her movements slow, defeated, as Samuel Carter, the security guard, watched with quiet professionalism, his earlier refusal to escort Will out vindicated. Will turned to his employees, his tone shifting to warmth. "Daniel," he said to the 26-year-old assistant manager who'd tried to de-escalate, "you saw wrong and acted. You're now manager of this location." Daniel's eyes widened, stunned by the promotion. Jessica Will continued addressing the 23-year-old sales associate whose kindness had shone through. "Your compassion is what Radiant Gems stands for. Your assistant manager." Jessica's tears were of joy, her hand covering her mouth. "Samuel," he said to the 45-year-old guard, "your judgment kept this from worsening. You're getting a raise and commendation." The store stirred customers murmuring approval, some clapping softly. An elderly man who'd watched silently nodded at Will, respect in his eyes. But Will's work wasn't done. He addressed the crowd, his voice carrying the weight of his journey. "To everyone here, I apologize for what you witnessed. This isn't Radiant Gems. We serve every customer with dignity, no exceptions." His words, captured on video, were already going viral, the live stream sparking outrage and support online. As the store resumed operations, Will straightened the crooked Stellar Collection display, a symbolic act of restoring order. But the victory was bittersweet. Back at his office that evening, he sat alone, the weight of the day pressing down. Facing discrimination in his own store, Margaret's assumption he was a thief. Her ease with the Warrens reopened old wounds. He'd built Radiant Gems to defy such bias, yet it persisted, a reminder of the systemic racism he'd fought since childhood. His grandfather's bracelet, worn through poverty and triumph, steadied him, but exhaustion lingered. The climactic twist came as Will left his office. Tucked under his car's wiper was a note scrawled in sharp ink. "You'll regret this, Jackson." His pulse quickened, the threat echoing Margaret's allies, or perhaps a deeper resistance within the industry. He pocketed the note, evidence for his team, but its weight was more than paper. It was a signal that his fight wasn't over, that exposing prejudice came with enemies. Yet Will's resolve hardened. He'd faced worse rejections, stereotypes, threats, and turned them into fuel. Returning home, Will called Robert, briefing him on the note and ordering a review of store security. The viral video was trending with hashtags like Radiant Justice and Chanchu End Retail Racism, amplifying the story. News outlets requested interviews, and customers shared their own experiences of bias, turning Will's stand into a movement. But the note lingered in his mind, a challenge to his vision. He touched his bracelet, vowing to protect what he'd built, not with anger, but with the grace that had brought him this far. The store was his, but the battle was just beginning. The Beverly Hills skyline glittered under a spring dusk, its opulence a stark contrast to the quiet resolve in William "Will" Jackson's heart. 6 months had passed since the confrontation at Radiant Gems' flagship store, where Will, the 42-year-old black CEO, exposed manager Margaret Ellison's racial prejudice. The viral video of her accusing him of theft, captured by customers and security cameras, had sparked a movement with hashtags like Radiant Justice trending worldwide. Will's firing of Margaret, promotions of Daniel Brooks and Jessica Lee, and commendation of Samuel Carter had reaffirmed his $180 million empire's commitment to dignity for all. Yet, as he stood on his office balcony touching his grandfather's tarnished silver bracelet, the threatening note, "You'll regret this." Jackson lingered in his mind, a reminder that change came with resistance. Will's actions had reshaped Radiant Gems. He implemented mandatory anti-bias training across his 47 stores, hired diversity consultants, and launched a customer feedback system to ensure no one felt the exclusion he'd faced. The Beverly Hills store, under Daniel's steady management, thrived, its $2.3 million monthly revenue, unbroken, now a symbol of inclusion. Jessica, as assistant manager, mentored young staff, her kindness echoing Will's values, while Samuel's professionalism set a new standard for security. Public response was overwhelming. Sales rose as customers, inspired by Will's stand, flocked to Radiant Gems, sharing stories of bias they'd overcome. But backlash persisted. Online detractors, some defending Margaret, others resentful of Will's prominence, called him a race baiter, accusing him of exploiting the incident. News outlets debated retail racism, with some framing Margaret as a victim of cancel culture. The anonymous note, traced to a burner phone, remained unsolved, though Will suspected a connection to Margaret's old money network. He'd faced prejudice before, rejections from investors, assumptions of criminality, but this felt personal, a challenge to the empire he'd built to defy stereotypes about black men. Will became a national voice, speaking at conferences on systemic racism, his story resonating with those who'd been profiled in stores or workplaces. At a Los Angeles summit, he shared his journey. "I didn't build Radiant Gems to prove I belonged. I built it so everyone does." His grandfather's bracelet, worn through poverty and triumph, gleamed under the lights, a symbol of resilience. Back home, he mentored Jessica, guiding her leadership, and bonded with employees, their trust a balm for the pain of Margaret's bias. The climactic challenge came at a community gala celebrating Radiant Gems' impact. As Will accepted an award for social responsibility, a former colleague of Margaret's, Richard Hale, a retail executive with ties to her Connecticut circles, approached. His smile was thin, his words laced with venom. "You've made enemies, Jackson," he said quietly. "Pushing this race narrative could cost you. Back off, or your stores might face scrutiny." The threat veiled as advice echoed the anonymous note, hinting at a coordinated effort to discredit Will. Will's pulse quickened, but his marine-honed calm held. "Scrutiny," he replied, his voice steady. "My stores are open books, but prejudice, that's what's getting exposed." Hale's smirk faltered as Will turned to the crowd, raising his award. "This isn't just for me," he said, his voice carrying. "It's for every person told they don't belong. We're building spaces where dignity wins." The applause was thunderous, drowning Hale's retreat. Community leaders, customers, and employees rallied around Will, their support a shield against detractors. At home, Will sat with his wife, reflecting on the gala. "They're scared of change," he said, touching his bracelet. She nodded. "You're showing what's possible. That's why they push back." Healing came slowly. Therapy eased the sting of Margaret's slurs, and mentoring youth at a local center grounded him. Will's vision grew. He funded scholarships for minority entrepreneurs, ensuring others could rise as he had. His final message came in a national TV interview, the bracelet glinting as he spoke. Don't let bias silence you. Speak up, stand together, demand respect. Behind every stereotype is a person, a story, a dream. He paused, eyes fierce. Change starts with us now. The words "a call to action" lingered, urging readers to confront prejudice and build inclusive spaces. Will's fight wasn't over. Hale's threat hinted at battles ahead, but his grandfather's bracelet reminded him resilience outlasts resistance. Radiant gems shone brighter, a beacon of justice, and Will, scarred but unbroken, stood ready for whatever came next. His legacy, a testament to grace over hate.